Free Kick Podcast. My name is Todd, and we are officially 1 day away from the 28th season in MLS history. One that Philadelphia Union fans are super excited for, as the Union return the core group of players back in hopes of winning some silverware this season. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are exactly like me, just kind of mind blown that, and I know I said it a couple podcasts ago, but watching the final, and now here we are about to be at Subaru Park 1 day away from the home opener against the Columbus Crew, and it seems like nothing has changed. And I know they're calling for cold weather, maybe some snow, maybe some rain, but one thing it is going to be is cold. And I don't think that's going to keep fans away. I think fans are going to come out. They want to see the new Sons of Ben tailgate spot. They want to see, all right, where's this team going to pick up from last season? And I cannot wait for that atmosphere at Subaru Park. And unfortunately, Chris wasn't able to make it onto the podcast this week. As I told you, I'm going to try to get Chris Duran on the podcast. And with it being the start of the MLS season, he had a lot of commitments lined up for this week. And Chris and I are going to try and record a podcast when these two teams meet again in September. But this does bring up a good point, which I've said it before on the podcast. And as many of you know, I've always made it a goal of mine to bring on commentators every week from the opposing team to preview a game with me. With the Apple TV deal, that becomes much more challenging as those commentators have more commitments now, and not all teams are going to have a radio broadcast of the season as of now. And so that's going to make doing preview shows a tad more difficult. And so I'm going to continue to reach out to people that I have contacts with, try and get as many commentators on the podcast as I can. I'm going to reach out to different journalists as well. Just going to try to give you guys the same content that I gave you the last couple seasons, where it's not just me previewing a game, because we all know it's a lot better getting the people that either call these games every single week or the people that write about these teams every single week on the podcast. And so I can do as much research as I want. But we all know numbers and stats don't tell you the whole picture. And so we're going to try my best to get as many of those people on the show this season. And like I always tell you guys, I believe in transparency, and I just wanted to give you guys the latest. And before we get into the preview against Columbus, I also want to give a quick shout out to Jordan and Logan over at Stateside Soccer Podcast. They had me on earlier in the week to preview the Union season, and it was great to be back on their podcast and talk Philadelphia Union. Both Logan and Jordan do a terrific job covering the league. Super knowledgeable, super hardworking, and you know, that's what makes this league great, in my opinion, is there's a lot of talented people covering MLS and soccer in America. And majority of those people that do that are doing this for free. And so I just tip my hat off to the work that Jordan and Logan are doing. If you guys haven't checked out the podcast, if you haven't checked out that episode, be sure you go ahead and check that out. And I also want to give Jordan a shout out because he reached out to me after the show and said, you know, I was thinking, you always say on your shows you're looking for writers and everything. And he's like, I'd like to come on board and write on your website. So really excited to have Jordan come on board and write some articles on the Philadelphia Union. And we know we have Kyle Almany on the website as well, writing a couple articles a month. And so very grateful for both of them. And if anybody else wants to get involved writing for the show, hit me up and we'll get you published on the website. But let's get into the reason why you guys are listening to the podcast in the first place. And that is because of the Philadelphia Union and Columbus Crew match this Saturday at 7:30 at Subaru Park. And this Columbus team, they are much changed from last season, with 9 players from the first team not returning this year, including starters Pedro Santos, who signed with DC United, Derek Etienne Jr. signed with Atlanta United, Artur was traded to Houston Dynamo, and most recently, Columbus Crew traded their captain, Jonathan Menza, to San Jose Earthquake, which now leads a big hole in the back line for Columbus. In Columbus, they made 5 signings this season, but I think the biggest signing they made, the biggest acquisition that they made, was hiring Wilfried Nancy from CF Montreal in the offseason. In Wilfried's 2 years in charge of Montreal, he had a record of 38, 25, and 16, including a second-place finish last year in the Eastern Conference, finishing with a record of 29 and 5 last season, 2 points off the Union. And Montreal also finished with more wins than the Union did last season. And with the successful season that Montreal had last season, Wilfried Nancy was up with Coach of the Year honors. We saw them sell 3 huge players on the roster in Alistair Johnson, and Kone, and Georgi Mihailovic. And Columbus, they decided to move on from Caleb Porter, even though Caleb Porter won them a MLS Cup a few seasons ago, but it was very evident that it was all falling apart last season in Columbus. And if you have the opportunity to get Wilfried Nancy, you're going to do everything you can to hire Wilfried, and that's exactly what Columbus did. And with Columbus missing a ton of key players, they do have a good core that they can build around, a good core group of players that are still there, including Aidan Morris. He looks to play a huge role in the midfield this year for the Crew, a player that Jim Curtin gave high praise for on Wednesday in his press conference with the media. And Jim Curtin talked about Aidan Morris's passing ability, his technical, and his tackling ability. I mean, he is everything you want in the midfield. He's not going to be long for MLS, in my opinion. He was recently called up to the January camp with the full U.S. national team. And I'm excited to watch Aidan continue to blossom into this complete midfielder this year for Columbus. Hopefully that doesn't happen against the Union. But Aidan's a player that I told you guys in my preview episode that I'm extremely high on. Jim Curtin's high on this kid. Columbus is obviously high on him, and you just look at all the underlying numbers for midfielders. He hits every single box, and so I'm looking forward to Aidan Morris developing this season. Just hopefully not against the Union, and then obviously Columbus still has the 1-2 punch in Lucas Zelarayan and Cucho. Those 2 players combined for 19 of Columbus's 26 goals after Cucho made his debut for the club in July. And then Darlington Nagbe is still at the club, who on his day can be one of the best midfielders in MLS. And Jim Curtin was full of praise for all 3 of those players.
Look, Columbus, obviously there's as much change as there's been. Obviously a change of coach is drastic, and Wilfried's going to implement a new way of playing. And you can see that, just in the tape that we've seen. They're going to pass out of some tight spots. They have real talent. So as much as there's a lot of change, there are some things that are still the same. It starts right up the middle with a great player like Darlington Nagbe, who between the 18-yard boxes for me is one of the best players our country's ever had and our league's ever had. Really special talent. It starts with him. It starts with Zelarayan and Cucho. Obviously, right up the spine of the team. They have some real weapons and are very, very dangerous. So, yes, I think the tactics will be different. The shape will be a little different. The way that they play will be different. And I think it'll evolve from week 1 to week 34, no question. But certainly those names aren't big surprises. You guys know that we're going to have to do a good job on them on the day. to try to keep that clean sheet that you talk about. So no easy task. We'll put a plan in place that, tries to limit those guys' time and space on the ball. And that's what we've done in the past with Columbus. They have such talented weapons. You just want to limit where they're getting their looks from. So if we can make, as an example, if we can make Zelleran play square and backwards, that's a victory for us. Darlington Nagbe is a guy that if you dive in on, he goes by you and all of a sudden he's driving at your back four and it becomes very dangerous. So keep him in front of you. Cucho has a way of popping up in the box and doing the unexpected. So we'll have our hands full. It's a really tough task, but we've defended well as a team, not just against Columbus in the past, but against all teams. And, we'll hopefully, have to bring our A game to do that, keep that clean sheet like you jinxed us on.
Yeah, come on, Kyle. Why'd you have to jinx the Union on keeping another clean sheet at home? I kid. But it's no secret that the Union are going to have their hands full against Columbus this Saturday night. And it is good to hear that Jim Curtin and his coaching staff have a game plan, which, all coaches are going to have a game plan. But that is one thing that I'm very appreciative of, is how honest and open Jim Curtin is. When you ask him something, he doesn't duck away from the question. He doesn't try to beat around the bush. Like, he'll straight up tell you, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're doing in training. This is how we plan on attacking, how we plan on defending. And you'll see it because Jim Curtin talked about it a lot at the end of the season, or I should say at the end of every game. He would talk about how their game plan was always getting the team's worst player on the field. They would identify before the game who the team believes going to be their worst player on the field. They want that player on the ball as much as possible, and the Union are just going to keep attacking that side of the field. And so I think we're going to see that, obviously, on Saturday. But even so, with just doing that, you've got to limit what Lucas Zelleran, what Cucho, what Darlington Nagbe, what Aiden Morris do. And in doing so, I mean, it's no easy task. But we saw the Union time and time again last season rise up to the challenge and shut out teams' best players and really not be hurt. And you do feel confident with the Union returning the same core group of players that they can continue to build on that success. They don't have to learn a new formation. They don't have to learn new tactics because they've all been playing in the same system for the last 3-4 years. And so everybody knows how to play. Everybody knows what to expect from each other. And again, saying that, it sounds a lot easier than what it really is. And Columbus are going to come in here and be highly motivated with a brand new manager in Wilfried Nancy. Those players are going to want to impress him. They're going to want to show Wilfried why they deserve to start week in and week out. And when you look at it, Wilfried Nancy has typically deployed a back three formation when he was with Montreal the last 2 seasons. And when Caleb Porter was in charge of Columbus, they would play with a back four. And there are some similarities between how these two teams want to attack, how they like to possess the ball. And I think, and I'll have this up on the website, show you guys visually what I'm talking about, but there's a lot of key areas on the field where Montreal and Columbus would like to possess the ball the most. And Jim Curtin said later on in his press conference that he believes, and he said this is no knock on Montreal, but Wilfried Nancy has better players at his disposal with Columbus than he did with Montreal. And Wilfried's going to bring those same ideas that he had in Montreal and apply them to this Columbus squad. And because there were so many similarities, this Columbus team may not look too different from last year. There's definitely going to be, different pressing cues, different formation. But I think the areas of the field that they attack, I think there's going to be a lot of similarities between what we saw last year with Columbus and what we'll see this year under Wilfried Nancy. And especially in the first game of the season, how much can you truly change in week one, where you've only had a couple of weeks working with these players, trying to get them to learn your formation, your pressing cues, and all that. So you don't want to change too much early on. In one area of the field, I think is going to be key, where Union fans should pay attention to, is the attacking third of the field. Last season, Columbus ranked third with 5,393 touches in the attacking third, while Montreal were ranked eighth with 5,092 touches. Montreal last season, they loved having Mihailovic on the ball in the attacking third, as well as Alistair Johnson playing as a right wingback. And that's something we could see from Columbus on Saturday if they decide to play Steve Moreira in his more natural position on the right instead of a center back. Something that Wilfried Nancy said that Moreira has the ability to play as a center back. And we'll get into lineup questions and all that here in a little bit with Columbus. But I think we will see Columbus using Lucas Zelarayan a lot like Wilfried had Montreal use Mihailovic. And that could be a problem because we saw how effective Mihailovic was last season for Montreal. I know at times Georgie would go out on the left wing a lot of times and then cut inside in the middle, where Zelarayan pretty much like to say central. But when you look at his heat map, I mean, that whole attacking third of the field, that whole middle part of the field is all red. That's where he's at his best, taking his touches, getting his players involved. And another comparison when I was looking at these two teams is Cucho. He's a striker, and you heard Jim Curtin talk about it, how he's a player that likes to pop up in the box late, and the center backs have to be aware of that movement, where he's not a typical striker. He'll drop deep to get on the ball, and a lot of his actions are at the top of that 18, doing those 1-2s with Lucas Zelarayan, and then that's when he pops up into the box. He'll go out to the wing. This is a player that doesn't stay central in the penalty box. And so, again, the Union center backs are going to have to be aware of that. And that is how Montreal used Kyoto, where he would take a lot of his touches at the end of the 18-yard box, and then he would find his way floating inside the 6-yard box, inside the penalty area. And so I think we will see a lot of similarities between Cucho and the way that Kyoto was used last year in Montreal. And going back to the formation issues, I've seen some people that cover the Crew saying that there's questions whether or not Josh Williams, one of their center backs, will be able to play in this game because of fitness. He would be one of the ideal center backs next to Deganek, who was fantastic for the Crew, one of the bright spots for the Crew last season, a player that they brought in from Australia. And so, because Josh Williams may not go, will Wilfried Nancy play his typical three in the back? Will he go to a back four, which these Columbus players were so used to playing last season? It's a question to be seen. But one player we know for sure who isn't playing is Eloy Room, who's supposedly dealing with visa issues, according to Wilfried Nancy. And right there, that's going to be a huge blow right out of the gate for Columbus Crew, not having their starting goalkeeper, one of the best goalkeepers in MLS, in my opinion. And so they'll have to go to MLS veteran Evan Bush, who is a respectable goalkeeper, but he is no Eloy Room. And if I had a guess for the lineup for Columbus right now, I would say I think they could go with the 3-5-2 formation, because Wilfried Nancy, even before there was questions about Josh Williams' fitness, he said that there's going to be opportunities where they play Steve Moreira as the right-sided center back. And so I think we do see that this weekend. And I wish I had the Columbus injury report at the time of recording this podcast, but Columbus has not released that yet. And I don't want to go on a rant too much and maybe I should save this for blunder of the week. But we talk about how MLS had these plans where they want more transparency. They want more transparency from the clubs where every week there's going to be the press conferences during the week and after the game on Apple TV. Did not get that. I cannot find Columbus's press conference during the week at all on their website, on Apple TV. And it makes no sense to me. And I don't want to rant on this too much because you guys don't want to be here for a rant. But it's crazy to me. You want to be transparent, but you have some clubs that are doing the bare minimum. They're not putting out these injury reports. They're not posting the press conferences that they were supposedly told they're supposed to put out. And so it did make this a little bit difficult recording this episode, trying to get as much notes possible where, okay, something as key as an injury report, can't find it because Columbus has not put it out yet. But going back to the formation, 3-5-2, I think we'll see from Columbus. Evan Bush in goal. The three center backs, Deganek, Quinton, their young center back, and Steve Moreira are going to be the center backs, in my opinion. And then we look at the two wing backs, Jimmy Madronda, who they signed from Seattle Sounders. And then I think they're going to go with Farsi, who is a natural right back. He only played, I believe, 5 times last season for Columbus. They could also go with Luis Diaz to play as that right wing back, but I do think they go with a more natural player. And then when you look at the two holding midfielders, no questions here. It's going to be Darlington Nagbe and Aiden Morris. The 10 is going to be Lucas Zelarayan. Kucher is going to be up top. And I think we see Christian Ramirez make a start up top. But again, I can be completely wrong since we don't have an injury report out from Columbus. Now, what to expect from the Union? I think it's going to be the same old that we saw from the Union last season. The lineup that we've all become accustomed to. Andre Blake in goal, Olivier Bizo, Glesnes, Elliott, Wagner as your back line, Jose Martinez, Liam Flock, L.A. Bedoya, and Daniel Gazdag as your midfielders, with Carranza and Ua as your two strikers. And last season, it took a bit for the offense to click because we would rotate strikers between Corey Burke and Sergio Santos to pair with Julian Carranza since Mikel Ua wasn't fit. But once that front three of Ua, Carranza, and Gazdag got to play more together, we saw how deadly that trio can be. And Jim Curtin was asked about the continuity between this team and those players.
Yeah, look, Jonathan, I think the word that doesn't get brought up enough for our team's success through the years now is continuity. You know, we've been able to stay together. We all know each other's strengths, and that includes the coaches and the players. We all know each other's strengths, but maybe more importantly, we know how to hide each other's weaknesses, which is a really powerful thing. And the fact that this group, for the most part, stays healthy all season because of our great sports performance department, because we get used to playing together over and over in training and then over and over in the games. I think that's been a real weapon for us. You know, are there going to be challenges during a new season? Absolutely. The offensive part, I do believe it takes a little bit longer to click for sure. But if your principles are strong and you defend well as a team and you don't concede goals, you'll be in every game. And that's how we want to start the season. And I think that you'll see the offense click. We know we have talent with Mikel Ure getting a full preseason now and having his first full year in the league. Much like Daniel, I could see him break out again. Carranza has been incredible in preseason. And Daniel Gazdag, is coming off of an MVP type year. So that front three is going to score a lot of goals. We'll have midfielders chip in with some goals, maybe a couple on restarts and that kind of thing. And I think we'll be okay. But I do believe that the defense is our foundation. It's our most important part for us, for the Philadelphia Union. And then I think the offensive goals and output will come as the weather warms up.
I agree with Jim Curtin there fully that we saw in the summertime. That's when this front three was at their hottest. And when the weather was warm, they were blowing out teams 5-6, 7-0. But with a full preseason, for this team to continue to build on that chemistry that they were building last season, it's only going to make this team that much better, the front three that much better. And that's why I picked Mikal Ua to be my leading goal scorer for the Union this season with 18 goals. That's why I said Mikal Ua is going to be the team MVP. And that's why I think he'll be one of the finalists for the Golden Boot. And then some quick numbers for you guys, because you guys know I love stats and analytics. And when we look at the numbers between the Union and Columbus, the Union are 5-3-3 in their home openers at Subaru Park, and they've played Columbus once in the opening season games, where the Union drew against Columbus. The Union at home are 10-4-1, 6 straight clean sheets, 11-0 in those 6 games. And Jim Curtin all time is 1-0-3 versus Wilfried Nancy and 0-2 at home when they played Wilfried Nancy's CF Montreal. And this was interesting too. None of the Union strikers have scored a goal versus Columbus. I believe out of all current players, the leading goal scorer against Columbus is Ali Bedoya and Jack Elliott, both with a goal apiece. So you figure Mikal Ua, Julian Kranza, Daniel Gazag, even though they haven't been in the league all that long, you feel that they're probably due a goal this weekend, right? And you guys know I love my keys to the game segment. Number one for me is you got to force Lucas Zelarayan and Nagby to force the ball sideways and backwards. And just like Jim Curtin said, our game plan is to get those guys to play those balls square and back. And if the Union do that, the Union are in really, really good shape. Number two, the Union needs shots on target, because the last 2 times the Union played at home against Wilfried Nancy's Montreal, the Union went ahead once in that game and conceded first the other time. And those 2 matchups against Wilfried Nancy's Columbus, which we're going to see similarities, like I already said, this week when we play Columbus, the Union went 1 for 3 with shots on target and 1 for 13 with shots on target in those 2 matches against Wilfried Nancy's Montreal. And that's not good. That's unacceptable. And I remember going on a long rant when we drew Montreal last season 1-1. I called it one of the worst Union performances of the season. In my opinion, that was still the Union's worst performance on the year. I know you can argue the Chicago game, but yeah, that game against Montreal last season at home was dreadful. We saw no shots. we got a goal on a Julian Kranza penalty, which was a questionable penalty to begin with. And the referees, the VAR, they gave the penalty. Fortunately for the Union, Julian Kranza puts it in the back of the net. But yeah, it's such a soft penalty. And the Union got dominated in that game by Montreal. Luckily, the Union didn't lose that game. And point number 3, though, is you got to start fast. The Union were one of the fastest starting teams last season with scoring goals in the first 15 minutes. I don't have how many goals they scored in the first 15 minutes because, of course, the site that I use to track all these kind of stats, their website went down from tracking all their stats from last season. The website's still up, but apparently they lost all their data from last year. So I have to go back and manually look at every single game. But I do remember from talking about it all the time on the podcast how I believe the number was like 12 goals, maybe 11 or 12 goals, I want to say, within the first 15 minutes. The Union and Montreal, I want to say, were the 2 fastest scoring teams within those minutes. And so, yeah, I want to see the same thing again in this game. Start fast. The crowd's going to be electric. The crowd's going to push this team on to play beautiful soccer. And we saw last year when the Union scored early, it forced teams not to sit deep against them at home. And it really opened up space for the Union to exploit. So those are my 3 games. I think this is going to be a fantastic game. And like you guys may or may not remember, I did not last season during the podcast give predictions of the score. And I'm not going to do that again this season. Superstitious a little bit because we saw what the Union did at home. And maybe it's because I didn't give score predictions on the podcast. So I'm going to continue not giving score predictions on the podcast and hope for the best. But before we end the podcast, Kyle Almany gave me 2 questions he wanted answered on the podcast, and he said, who scores the first Union goal of 2023? And also, is this a must-win match? So, who scores the first goal for the Union? Oh, man. Can we say own goal? Because of the game against Columbus last year at home, where people wanted the goal given to Jose Martinez. It was never going to be given to Jose Martinez because Eloy Room dropped the ball inside the goal. But I'm going to go with Julian Kranza. He's going to score the first goal. He was hot in preseason, and I think he carries over that form from preseason into the regular season. But if you guys say Daniel Gazdag, I think that's a great shout as well. And is this a must-win game? Yeah, I would say so. I would say it's a must-win. I mean, you could say every game's a must-win, right? But if the Union are really going to focus on CCL and US Open Cup, and you guys heard this again in my predictions, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the Union have a potential of playing 28 games in the first half of the season, where you're going to focus a lot on CCL and US Open Cup. You want to get as many points as possible, number 1, at home. But number 2, earlier on in the season. The Union would have got 1 point in the first half of the season last year. They would have been hosting MLS Cup, but we're not here to say shoulda, coulda, woulda. So, yeah, I'll say it's a must-win because every game should be a must-win. But it's because the Union are going to focus on CCL and US Open Cup, so you always want to win at home. But if you guys aren't following the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, follow at Free Kick Pod, wherever you get your podcast, The Free Kick. Check out the website, thefreekick.net. And I just look forward to seeing all you guys at Subaru Park again this weekend, being back at the stadium, just listening to the crowd be so electric, making that stadium shake. And yeah, I look forward to getting back to the same old that we did last year with the podcast. A lot of fun, and again, going to try and get as many commentators and journalists on the podcast again this season. It's going to be difficult, like I said at the beginning, but we're not going to give up, and we're going to keep reaching out to those people that have been on the podcast in the past and hope that the schedule will start to open up and they can come back onto the show. But I'll see you guys on Sunday. I think we'll have a match review episode out. If not Sunday, on Monday. We're definitely recording the episode on Sunday, so I guess it depends on when I get that edited out for you guys. But until then, my name is Todd, and this is the Free Kick Podcast.